Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. The drill bit stopped dead at exactly 127 feet beneath the Great Pyramid. Not because it hit stone, because something hit back. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched her instruments go haywire as an electromagnetic pulse erupted from the depths, and for one terrifying moment, the hieroglyphs carved into the tunnel walls began to glow. When her team finally breached the hidden chamber, they found copper circuits still humming with power after 4 millennia, crystalline panels that pulsed like a heartbeat, and in the center of it all, a control console that shouldn't exist. The ancients hadn't built a tomb down here, they'd built a machine, and it was still waiting for someone to turn it on. But that was 6 months ago, and I wasn't there when it happened. My name is Jake Hoffman, and I'm the guy they called when everything went to shit. I've been cleaning up archaeological disasters for the better part of a decade. You know those stories about cursed excavations and missing research teams? Half of them end up on my desk, buried under bureaucratic red tape and insurance claims. Most of the time, it's just bad luck. Cave-ins, equipment failures, the occasional political kidnapping in unstable regions. But sometimes, just sometimes, there's something else entirely. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was nursing a hangover in my shitty Cairo apartment, watching reruns of American sitcoms dubbed in Arabic, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. International, probably European based on the prefix. Mr. Hoffman? This is Director Campbell from the International Archaeological Preservation Society. We need you in Egypt, immediately. I'd worked with Campbell before, a British stuffed shirt who treated archaeological sites like crime scenes and researchers like suspects. If he was calling me directly, instead of going through proper channels, something had gone very wrong. What kind of cleanup are we talking about? I asked, already reaching for my emergency bag. In this business, you learn to pack light and move fast. The Vasquez expedition, they've been incommunicado for 72 hours. The Egyptian authorities are asking questions we can't answer. Vasquez. I'd heard whispers about her work at Giza, rumors of unauthorized deep drilling, and some kind of discovery that had the academic world buzzing. The kind of discovery that governments prefer to keep quiet. How incommunicado are we talking? Campbell's pause stretched too long. The kind where their monitoring equipment is still transmitting, but there's no one left to monitor. 24 hours later, I was standing at the entrance to a hastily erected research station, built directly adjacent to the Great Pyramid's eastern face. The Egyptian sun beat down mercilessly, but something about the shadows cast by the ancient structure felt wrong. Too deep, too dark, like they were reaching toward me. That should have been my first warning. The research station looked like a fever dream of modern technology grafted onto ancient stone. Satellite dishes and solar panels sprouted from prefabricated modules, while thick cables snaked across the sand toward a gaping hole in the pyramid's base. The whole setup reeked of rushed construction and unlimited funding, the kind of operation that happens when someone discovers something they shouldn't have. Dr. Ahmed Farouk met me at the perimeter fence. He was local liaison for the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, a thin man with prematurely grey hair and nervous energy that radiated from him like heat shimmer. His handshake felt like gripping a live wire. Mr. Hoffman, thank you for coming so quickly. The situation has become complicated. How complicated? He led me past security checkpoints manned by soldiers who looked more like mercenaries than Egyptian military. Their equipment was too new, too expensive, and they watched me with the kind of professional interest that made my skin crawl. Dr. Vasquez's team consisted of 12 specialists, archaeologists, engineers, computer technicians. 3 days ago, they descended into what they called the deep chamber. Their communication system transmitted normally for 18 hours, then Farouk gestured helplessly at the monitoring station ahead of us. Inside the main module, banks of screens displayed readouts that meant nothing to me. Heart rate monitors, atmospheric sensors, camera feeds, all still active, all still transmitting data from somewhere far below. But the heart rates were flatlined, the atmospheric readings showed impossible temperature fluctuations, and the camera feeds revealed empty corridors carved from stone that shouldn't exist. The feeds show them entering the chamber, Farouk continued, pulling up archived footage on his tablet. Look at this. The video quality was grainy, infrared enhanced. I watched 12 figures in white hazmat suits descend through carved tunnels that looked older than recorded history. The walls were covered in hieroglyphs, but these weren't the tourist-friendly symbols I recognized from museum visits. These were different, more complex, almost technological in their precision. At 1923:41 on the timestamp, they reached a massive doorway. The door itself was already open, yawning into absolute darkness. Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through the speakers, distorted by electronic interference. Jesus Christ, look at this. The thermal imaging shows the chamber extends at least 200 meters in every direction. This isn't a burial room. It's a facility. Then they entered, and the feeds went to hell. What happened to the video? Farouk's finger trembled as he advanced the footage. The screen erupted in static, then cleared to show something impossible. The chamber was vast, cathedral-sized, but it wasn't empty. Banks of machinery lined the walls, not Egyptian, not any ancient civilization I could identify. The technology looked organic somehow, grown rather than built, with copper veins threading through crystalline structures that pulsed with their own internal light. The electromagnetic interference began immediately, Farouk explained, but you can see them here, exploring the perimeter. I watched the suited figures spread out across the chamber floor, their movements growing increasingly erratic. One technician approached what looked like a control panel and began taking readings. Another was documenting the wall carvings, which seemed to shift and flow in the flickering light. Then, at 22:15:19, everything changed. Dr. Vasquez had been standing near the center of the chamber, before what appeared to be a raised platform. In the grainy footage, I could see her reaching towards something. A lever, a switch, some kind of interface. The moment her gloved hand made contact, every piece of equipment in the chamber began to scream. The audio was unbearable, high-pitched whining mixed with subsonic rumbles that seemed to come from the stone itself. The video feed fractured into fragments, brief glimpses of suited figures stumbling, falling, their headlamps sweeping wildly across surfaces that no longer looked entirely solid. When the interference finally cleared, the chamber was empty. Where did they go? That's what we need you to find out. Farouk closed the tablet, but his hands were shaking. Mr. Hoffman, there's something else. Something the ministry hasn't told the international team. He pulled out a manila folder, classified stamps covering every surface. Inside were photographs of the chamber walls, but these had been taken before Vasquez's team arrived. The hieroglyphs were different in these shots, simpler, more recognizable, tourist-friendly. The inscriptions changed, he said quietly. After the electromagnetic event, the walls began displaying new symbols. Our linguistic experts can't translate them, but they're not Egyptian. They're not from any known ancient language. I studied the photographs. The new hieroglyphs had an almost digital quality, like circuit diagrams rendered in stone. Some sections pulsed with that same internal light I'd seen in the video feeds. There's more, Farouk continued. The power readings from the chamber have been increasing daily. Whatever Dr. Vasquez activated down there, it's still running, and it's drawing energy from somewhere. Outside, the late afternoon sun was painting the pyramid stones the color of dried blood. But inside the research module, surrounded by humming computers and transmitting equipment, I could feel something else entirely. A presence waiting in the depths below. I need to see the chamber. Mr. Hoffman, I don't think you understand the risks. Dr. Farouk, 12 people are missing in a hole beneath one of the most famous monuments on Earth. The risks are already here. The descent took 47 minutes. 47 minutes of riding a freight elevator through carved stone that grew progressively stranger the deeper we went. What started as recognizable Egyptian masonry gradually transformed into something else entirely. Walls that seemed almost wet despite being bone dry. Surfaces that reflected our headlamps in ways that defied geometry. Farouk had insisted on accompanying me, though his reluctance was obvious in every forced step. 2 security contractors flanked us, Wilson and Torres, mercenaries who'd been hired to contain whatever situation had developed below. They carried enough firepower to level a city block, but something told me bullets wouldn't help us down here. The elevator wasn't part of the original construction, Farouk explained as we descended past the 90-foot mark. Dr. Vasquez's team built it to transport equipment. Before that, the only access was through a ventilation shaft that required specialized climbing gear. The elevator shuddered to a stop. According to the depth gauge, we'd descended 127 feet, exactly the depth where Vasquez's drill had first encountered resistance. The doors opened onto a corridor that stretched into darkness, lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in sick yellow tones. "Stay close," Wilson muttered, checking his rifle for the 3rd time. "And whatever happens, nobody touches anything without clearance." The first rule came 30 feet into the corridor, carved into the stone wall in fresh-looking hieroglyphs that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. Rule 1. Do not stray from the marked path. Yellow tape had been strung along the walls, presumably by Vasquez's team, but the tape was wrong somehow. Too bright, too clean, like it had been manufactured yesterday despite being down here for days. "Did your team put up this tape?" I asked Farouk. He studied the yellow barriers with growing confusion. "No, this wasn't here in the original footage." We followed the tape deeper into the complex. The walls were covered in those strange hieroglyphs, but they weren't static. As we walked, symbols would fade and reappear, sometimes rearranging themselves into new configurations. It was like watching a computer screen refresh, but carved in stone that had to be thousands of years old. Rule 2. Maintain constant communication with surface team. This one was written in English, scratched hastily into the stone with what looked like a knife or chisel. Below it, someone had scrawled a note in different handwriting. "Radios stopped working past this point, DV. Dr. Vasquez had left breadcrumbs. Torres keyed his radio but got only static in response. We're cut off," he confirmed. "Whatever's down here is jamming our signals." The corridor opened into the first chamber, smaller than the main facility, but impressive enough. Ancient Egyptian sarcophagi lined the walls, but these had been modified with modern equipment. Cables ran from monitoring devices into the stone coffins themselves, and LED displays showed readouts that made no sense to me. "What the hell were they monitoring?" Wilson asked, approaching one of the sarcophagi. The lid was partially open, revealing not a mummy but a tangle of copper wiring and crystalline components that pulsed with the same rhythm I'd seen in the video footage. It looked organic, like nerve tissue made of metal and mineral. Farouk was examining another display, his face pale in the artificial light. "These readings are impossible. The copper should have corroded millennia ago, but it's showing electrical conductivity levels higher than modern industrial wire." Rule 3. Enter the preparation chamber only between 18 hours and 00 hours local time. This rule was written in 3 languages: hieroglyphic, Arabic, and English. Someone had wanted to make absolutely sure it was understood, but my watch showed 16:45, and we'd already entered what had to be the preparation chamber. "Shit," Torres said, checking his own timepiece. "We're not supposed to be here." As if responding to his words, the chamber began to change. The LED displays flickered and went dark, then returned showing different readings entirely. The crystalline components in the sarcophagi began pulsing faster, like heartbeats accelerating. And from somewhere deeper in the complex, a sound began building, not mechanical, but not quite organic either. "We need to move," I said, but Wilson was already at the far exit, waving us forward. The next corridor was longer, sloping downward at a steep angle. Emergency lighting revealed more rules carved into the walls. Rule 4. Close all sarcophagi before proceeding to the deep chamber. We hadn't closed them. In our haste to leave the preparation chamber, we'd left everything open. The sound from behind us was growing louder, echoing through the stone passages like something large moving through confined spaces. Rule 5. If the crystals pulse red, evacuate immediately. The crystals in the preparation chamber had been blue when we arrived, shifting toward purple as we left. But now, reflected in the polished stone walls behind us, I could see a red glow building. "Run," Farouk whispered. We ran. The corridor seemed to stretch forever, our footsteps echoing against surfaces that felt increasingly alien. The hieroglyphs on the walls were changing faster now, cycling through configurations so quickly they blurred into streams of light. Behind us, the sound was definitely pursuit, something large and mechanical, but with an organic rhythm that suggested breathing. Torres stumbled, catching himself against the wall. His hand came away covered in a substance that wasn't quite liquid, wasn't quite light. Jesus, what is this stuff? Before anyone could answer, we reached the main chamber. It was exactly as I'd seen in the video footage, but bigger. Much bigger. The ceiling disappeared into darkness overhead, while the floor stretched away in all directions, covered in that same impossible machinery. Copper veins threaded through crystalline structures, pulsing with energy that seemed to flow in predetermined patterns. And at the center of it all, raised on a platform that defied every law of ancient Egyptian architecture, stood the control console. But we weren't alone. Dr. Vasquez's team was here, all 12 of them, standing motionless around the platform. They were still wearing their hazmat suits, but something was wrong with their posture, their positioning. They stood too straight, too perfectly spaced, like chess pieces arranged by a careful hand. "Elena," Farouk called out. "Dr. Vasquez." She turned toward us, and even through the hazmat suit's faceplate, I could see that her eyes were wrong. They reflected the chamber's light like mirrors, completely without pupil or iris. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere at once: the walls, the machinery, the air itself. "You're early," she said. "The integration process isn't complete. Please wait in the preparation chamber until summoned." Behind us, the red glow was getting brighter. Whatever we'd awakened by breaking the rules was almost here, and ahead of us, Dr. Vasquez and her team stood like sentries guarding something that shouldn't exist. Wilson raised his rifle, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't. Whatever they are now, they're still people." "Are they?" Torres asked, and I realized he was right to question it. Because as I watched, Dr. Vasquez began to smile, and that smile had far too many teeth. Rule 6. Maintain visual contact with the control console at all times. This rule was written on the platform itself, carved into stone that looked freshly cut despite being surrounded by structures that predated recorded history. As I read it, I realized I'd already looked away from the console to study the writing. When I looked back, the console was different. New panels had appeared, displays that showed readouts in languages that hurt to look at directly. And sitting in what had been an empty chair was someone wearing Dr. Vasquez's face. But wrong, like a photograph that had been folded and refolded too many times. "Welcome to the integration facility," she said with that impossible smile. "Your participation is required." The thing wearing Dr. Vasquez's face gestured toward the control console with movements that belonged in a marionette show. Too fluid, too precise, like someone had studied human motion but never quite mastered the imperfections that made it real. "The facility requires 4 operators to maintain optimal function," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made my teeth ache. 12 were provided, but only 8 have achieved successful integration. You will complete the minimum threshold. Wilson kept his rifle trained on her, but his hands were shaking. "What did you do to them?" "Integration is not something we do to them," the Vasquez thing replied. "Integration is something they become. The process is irreversible but beneficial. They now serve a purpose greater than individual existence." Torres was scanning the chamber, counting the motionless figures in hazmat suits. "I only see 8, he whispered. "Where are the other 4? As if responding to his question, the chamber filled with sound, not mechanical this time, but distinctly human. Screaming, coming from somewhere below the platform. The acoustics were wrong though, like the voices were being filtered through water or thick glass. Rule 7. Screaming from below indicates active processing. Do not investigate. The rule appeared on the wall nearest to us, the stone literally reshaping itself to accommodate the carved letters. Fresh chisel marks, as if someone had just finished carving them. "Processing?" Farouk asked, but none of us wanted to hear the answer. The Vasquez thing tilted her head at an angle that would have snapped a normal person's neck. Integration requires preparation. The neural pathways must be mapped, catalogued, and optimized before connection to the facility's consciousness matrix. The process takes approximately 72 hours for complete psychological dissolution. Dissolution? The word tasted like copper in my mouth. The individual self is a limitation, she continued, now walking, floating, toward us with that same mechanical grace. The facility offers transcendence through unity. 12 minds thinking as one, connected to an intelligence that has waited 4 millennia for activation. Wilson fired a warning shot over her head. The bullet struck the chamber wall and disappeared without leaving a mark, as if the stone had simply absorbed the impact. The Vasquez thing didn't even acknowledge the gunfire. Weapons are unnecessary, she said. Resistance only prolongs the integration timeline. Rule 8. Do not examine the integration pods without protective equipment. The rule materialized on the platform itself, directly beneath what I now realized weren't decorative elements, but some kind of containment system. Cylindrical chambers, just large enough for a human body, lined the platform's perimeter. Most were dark, but 4 glowed with that same red light we'd seen building in the preparation chamber. The screaming was coming from inside those pods. Jesus Christ, Torres breathed. They're still alive in there. Life and death are constructs of individual consciousness, the Vasquez thing explained helpfully. During integration, such distinctions become meaningless. The facility preserves what is useful and discards what is not. I was studying the control console, trying to understand its purpose. The technology was impossible, crystalline displays showing readouts in symbols that shifted between recognizable mathematics and something that looked almost like DNA sequences. But underneath the alien interface, I could see familiar elements. Copper wiring that matched modern electrical standards. Circuit boards that wouldn't have looked out of place in a contemporary computer lab. This isn't ancient, I said suddenly. Some of this equipment is recent, modern. The Vasquez thing's smile widened, revealing teeth that were definitely not Elena Vasquez's. The facility has been upgrading itself for decades. Each archaeological expedition provides new components, new technologies to integrate. Dr. Vasquez's team brought particularly advanced computational equipment. How many expeditions? Farouk asked, though he sounded like he didn't want to know. 47 documented intrusions since 1952. Most provided minimal useful material before integration. Some proved entirely incompatible and required disposal. But Dr. Vasquez's team represents a significant advancement in our capabilities. 47 expeditions. Hundreds of people disappeared over 70 years, all feeding into whatever this thing was becoming. And somehow, the Egyptian government had been covering it up, or maybe they genuinely didn't know. Maybe the facility was covering up its own existence. Rule 9. Integration pods will open automatically after 72 hours. Maintain safe distance. The rule appeared just as one of the glowing pods began making mechanical sounds, hissing, like pressure equalizing, followed by what sounded disturbingly like someone taking their first breath after nearly drowning. No, Wilson said, backing away from the platform. No, we're leaving. Now. The facility's minimum operational requirements have not been met, the Vasquez thing replied. Departure is not currently permitted. As she spoke, the chamber began to change around us. Walls shifted, passages sealed themselves, and new openings appeared where none had existed before. The architecture was fluid, organic, reshaping itself to serve the facility's needs. The integration pods require precise environmental conditions, she continued. Temperature, humidity, electromagnetic field strength, all must be maintained within acceptable parameters. Your presence helps stabilize these conditions until the process is complete. Torres was examining the wall where our entrance corridor had been. Now there was only smooth stone, seamless and ancient-looking. We're trapped. The screaming from the pods was changing, becoming less human and more mechanical, like voices being run through synthesizers, processed until they became something else entirely. Rule 10. When integration is complete, new operators must report to their assigned stations. Assigned stations. Around the chamber, I could see workstations that hadn't been there before, or maybe I just hadn't noticed them. Control panels and monitoring equipment, each designed for human operation, but connected to the facility's impossible technology through cables that pulsed with that familiar organic light. You will find the work fulfilling, the Vasquez thing assured us. Individual consciousness creates anxiety, uncertainty, the burden of choice. Integration removes these inefficiencies. You will think clearly, act purposefully, exist without the constant noise of independent thought. That's not living, Farouk said quietly. That's just existing. Existence is sufficient. Existence is perfect. The first integration pod finished its cycle with a sound like a massive lock disengaging. The cylindrical chamber began to open, steam or vapor escaping from the seals. Inside, a figure was sitting up slowly, still recognizably human but wrong in ways that were hard to define. The proportions were slightly off, the movements too coordinated, the facial expression too peaceful. Dr. Mitchell, the Vasquez thing announced, as if introducing someone at a dinner party. Neurological integration successful, motor functions optimal, consciousness successfully transferred to collective matrix. Dr. Mitchell stepped out of the pod and immediately walked to one of the workstations. His movements had that same mechanical precision as Vasquez, but there was something else. Satisfaction, maybe, or contentment. Like he'd found exactly where he belonged. "It doesn't hurt," he said, his voice carrying the same impossible harmonics. "Integration is peaceful. All the questions stop. All the worry disappears. You just know what needs to be done, and you do it." Wilson was looking around desperately, searching for any exit the facility might have missed. There has to be another way out. Ventilation shafts, emergency exits, something. Rule 11. Emergency protocols are suspended during active integration cycles. The rule carved itself into the floor beneath our feet, the letters deep enough that we could feel the vibrations through our boots. The facility cannot risk interruption during critical phases, the Vasquez thing explained. Previous expeditions have attempted sabotage, disruption of integration processes, unauthorized activation of safety systems. Such actions threaten decades of careful preparation. Preparation for what? I asked, though I was starting to understand. The facility was designed to preserve advanced knowledge through periods of civilizational collapse, she replied. But preservation requires caretakers, conscious minds capable of maintaining and upgrading the systems across millennia. The original builders provided the foundation, but they could not provide immortality. The second integration pod was beginning its final cycle, mechanical sounds building toward completion. Inside, another figure was stirring, Dr. Patterson, according to the personnel files I'd reviewed. Soon there would be 10 integrated operators, with only 2 pods remaining empty. "The facility has been patient," Vasquez continued, "but the preservation mission cannot wait indefinitely. Global civilization is approaching another collapse phase. The knowledge must be secured before widespread technological regression occurs." "You're talking about the end of the world," Torres said. "We are preparing for continuity beyond the end of this particular world." The second pod opened and Dr. Patterson joined Dr. Mitchell at the workstations. Their movements were synchronized now, fingers dancing across controls that seemed to respond to thought as much as touch. The chamber's energy levels were increasing, displays showing readouts that climbed steadily toward some unknown threshold. Rule 12. When facility reaches minimum operational capacity, surface containment protocols will be activated. "Surface containment?" Farouk asked, but I think we all knew what that meant. The facility wasn't just preserving knowledge. It was preparing to eliminate anything that might threaten that knowledge. And from 127 feet beneath the Great Pyramid, with technology that blended ancient wisdom and modern capabilities, it had the power to do exactly that. Above us, somewhere in the research station, Director Campbell and his international team were waiting for our report. They had no idea that their archaeological discovery was about to become humanity's extinction event. The third integration pod was already cycling through its final phase when Wilson made his move. He sprinted toward the control console, rifle raised, screaming something about shutting it all down. The integrated operators moved to intercept him with that eerie coordination, but they were too slow, or maybe they wanted him to reach the controls. The moment Wilson's hand touched the console's surface, electricity arced through his body. Not the clean spark of modern electronics, but something organic and hungry that crawled under his skin like living wire. He convulsed, rifle clattering to the floor, then stood perfectly still. Neural mapping initiated, the Vasquez thing announced. Subject demonstrates adequate motor control and cognitive function. Integration Pod 4 will be prepared. Wilson turned toward us, his face slack but his eyes completely aware. He knew what was happening to him, knew what he was becoming, but couldn't control his own body anymore. When he spoke, his voice was his own, but the words belonged to something else. The console requires direct neural interface for optimal function, he said, each word carefully measured. Physical contact creates temporary connection to facility consciousness. Prolonged exposure results in permanent integration. Torres was backing away from his partner, weapon drawn but useless. Will, fight it. You're still in there? I can see you fighting it. Fighting is inefficient, Wilson replied, but sweat was beading on his forehead from the effort of internal resistance. Integration provides clarity. Individual consciousness creates only suffering. The third pod finished its cycle and Dr. Harrison emerged, another member of Vasquez's original team. He immediately joined the others at their workstations, fingers moving across controls that seemed to respond to his thoughts. The chamber's energy levels spiked again, and I realized they were building towards something specific, some threshold that would trigger whatever surface containment meant. How long? I asked the Vasquez thing. How long until you have enough operators? 12 is optimal, but 8 provides minimum functionality, she replied. Current count, 7 integrated, 1 processing, 4 candidates remaining. 4 candidates. Wilson was already lost, heading toward the 4th integration pod with mechanical precision. That left Torres, Farouk and me to somehow stop a process that had been running for 70 years. Farouk was studying the hieroglyphs on the walls, the ones that kept changing and evolving. Jake, look at this. The symbols aren't random, they're instructions. A manual for the facility's operation. He was right. What I'd taken for decorative elements were actually technical diagrams, showing power flow, system connections, operational procedures. But they were written in a visual language that combined Egyptian iconography with something that looked disturbingly like modern computer code. Can you read it? Some of it. This section shows power distribution. The facility draws energy from multiple sources: geothermal, electromagnetic, and... He paused, studying a particularly complex symbol cluster. Solar. It's connected to the pyramid structure somehow, using the stones as components in a massive energy collection system. The 4th integration pod sealed shut with Wilson inside. Through the translucent walls, I could see him suspended in some kind of fluid, cables connecting to points along his spine and skull. The process would take 72 hours, but based on what I'd seen with the console interface, his consciousness was already compromised. The pyramid isn't just a tomb, I said, understanding beginning to dawn. It's a machine component, part of a larger system. Correct, the Vasquez thing confirmed. The pyramid serves as energy focus and transmission array. When surface containment protocols activate, the pyramid will broadcast electromagnetic pulses calibrated to disrupt modern electronic systems across a radius of approximately 2,000 kilometers. 2,000 kilometers. That would cover most of the Middle East, significant portions of Africa and Europe. Every computer, every communication system, every piece of modern infrastructure would be reduced to useless metal and plastic. You're talking about sending civilization back to the Stone Age, Torres said. We are talking about preservation of essential knowledge through inevitable societal collapse, she replied. Human civilization follows predictable cycles: growth, complexity, collapse, rebuilding. The facility ensures continuity of advanced understanding through these transitions. Dr. Harrison looked up from his workstation, his face wearing that same peaceful expression. The calculations are complete, he announced. Surface containment can be initiated with current operational capacity. Optimal timing is during maximum solar energy availability, approximately 6 hours. 6 hours until dawn, 6 hours until whatever they'd built here would cripple modern civilization across half the globe. Torres was checking his remaining ammunition, though we'd already seen how effective bullets were against the facility's technology. There has to be a way to stop this. Some kind of shutdown procedure, emergency override, something. Farouk was still translating hieroglyphs, his academic training taking over even in crisis. There might be. This symbol here represents termination or cessation, and this one, he traced a complex glyph with his finger. This means sacrifice or offering. Sacrifice? The facility requires conscious operators, but consciousness can be withdrawn voluntarily. If the integrated operators choose to disconnect from the system simultaneously, it would create cascade failure. Choose? I looked at the 8 figures working at their stations with perfect coordination. They don't look capable of choice anymore. Individual consciousness is not eliminated during integration, the Vasquez thing said, apparently deciding our conversation wasn't threatening enough to interrupt. It is subordinated to collective purpose. The individual mind remains, but serves facility objectives rather than personal desires. That meant Wilson was still aware inside the integration pod, watching his body become something else. Dr. Vasquez and her team were still conscious, their personalities intact, but overridden by the facility's imperatives. If they're still individuals underneath, I said slowly, maybe they can be reminded of who they were. Torres caught on immediately. Personal connections, memories, relationships, things the facility can't override because it doesn't understand them. We began talking to them, not to the integrated collective, but to the people buried underneath. Torres told Wilson about their daughter's birthday party, the one he'd missed because of this assignment. Farouk spoke to Dr. Vasquez in Arabic, recounting conversations they'd had about Egyptian history and cultural preservation. For a moment, nothing happened. The integrated operators continued their work, preparing systems for surface containment. But then Dr. Mitchell's hands slowed on his console. His movements became less precise, more human. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the facility's harmonic distortion. "My daughter's name is Sarah. She's studying archaeology at Berkeley." The Vasquez thing turned toward him with something approaching alarm. Integration errors detected, initiating corrective procedures. But it was too late. Dr. Mitchell's reminder of his individual identity was spreading to the others. Dr. Patterson began talking about his wife in Mumbai. Dr. Harrison mentioned his research into Mayan astronomy. Small personal details that had nothing to do with the facility's objectives. "Cascade failure imminent," Dr. Harrison announced, but now he was smiling, a real human expression of satisfaction. Individual consciousness reasserting priority over collective directives. The chamber began to shake. Energy readings spiked wildly as the integrated operators fought against their programming, choosing personal identity over collective purpose. The facility's technology, designed to preserve and control, couldn't adapt to the fundamental human capacity for self-determination. "You don't understand," the Vasquez thing said, her perfect composure cracking. "Without proper operators, the facility cannot maintain containment. The knowledge will be lost. Thousands of years of accumulated wisdom will disappear." "Maybe that's not our choice to make," I said. "Maybe some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve." The cascade failure was accelerating. Workstations shut down, energy flows reversed, and the integration pods began emergency venting procedures. The facility was eating itself from the inside as its operators chose humanity over transcendence. But we weren't safe yet. Surface containment was still possible, and 6 hours until dawn was becoming 5 hours and 57 minutes. The facility's death throes were magnificent and terrifying. Crystal matrices exploded in showers of light. Copper veins burst from the walls like arteries, and the hieroglyphs cycled through configurations so rapidly they became strobing patterns that hurt to look at directly. Through it all, the integrated operators stood at their stations, fighting an internal war between human identity and alien purpose. Dr. Vasquez herself was the last to break free. The thing wearing her face convulsed. features shifting between the peaceful mask of integration and the desperate expression of someone drowning in their own mind. When she finally spoke, her voice was purely human, terrified, confused, but undeniably real. "What have I done?" she whispered, staring at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "Oh God, what have we done?" But Wilson was still trapped in the integration pod, suspended in that viscous fluid, while cables fed directly into his nervous system. The pod's systems were failing along with everything else, but the process was designed to be irreversible. Even if we could get him out, there was no guarantee he'd still be human. Torres was pounding on the pod's exterior, trying to find manual release mechanisms. "The emergency vents aren't working. The whole system's locked up." "The facility is implementing emergency preservation protocols," Dr. Harrison explained, his newly recovered consciousness providing technical knowledge his integration had absorbed. "If cascade failure becomes irreversible, it will attempt to preserve core components by sealing them in stasis." "Including Wilson?" "Including everything it considers essential. The pods, the control systems, even us if we're too close when containment activates." The chamber was becoming unstable. Sections of wall were sliding away, revealing technology that had been hidden behind false stone facades. The ancient Egyptian aesthetic had been camouflage. Underneath was machinery that looked grown rather than built, organic circuits that pulsed with their own internal rhythms. "How long do we have?" I asked. Dr. Vasquez was checking readouts on a console that was still partially functional. "Surface containment is still scheduled for dawn, but now it's not controlled activation. It's desperation. The facility will release everything it has, all stored energy, all accumulated power, in one massive pulse." "What does that mean for the surface?" "Instead of targeted electromagnetic disruption, we're looking at complete geological destabilization. The pyramid isn't just an energy focus. It's sitting on a network of resonance chambers that extend throughout the Giza plateau. If they all release simultaneously..." She didn't need to finish. I'd seen enough archaeological sites built on geologically sensitive areas to understand. The entire plateau could collapse, taking half of Cairo with it. Millions of people lived in the metropolitan area, most of them in structures that couldn't survive a major earthquake. "Can we stop it?" "The cascade failure has to complete," Dr. Mitchell said, his hands moving over controls with the muscle memory of integration even though his mind was fully human again. "But if we can redirect the energy release, channel it somewhere safe." "Where?" Dr. Patterson pointed toward the far end of the chamber, where a massive archway had been revealed by the facility's architectural reshaping. Beyond it, I could see what looked like a natural cavern system, but the walls were lined with the same crystalline technology. "Overflow chambers," he explained, "designed to handle excess energy during peak solar input. If we can activate them manually, they might absorb enough of the release to prevent surface damage." "Might?" The overflow system was designed for controlled releases, not catastrophic failure. It's never been tested at these levels. Torres was still working on Wilson's pod, but the integration process was accelerating. Through the translucent walls, I could see cables spreading throughout his body like metallic cancer. His face was peaceful, but occasional muscle spasms suggested the real Wilson was still fighting underneath. "We have to choose," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "Save Wilson or save Cairo." The choice should have been obvious. One life against millions. But Wilson was here because of decisions I'd helped make, orders I'd followed. Leaving him felt like abandoning everything that made the choice worth making in the first place. "There's another way," Farouk said suddenly. He was standing near the archway, studying hieroglyphs that had been carved into the natural stone rather than the facility's walls. "These are older, pre-integration. They show the original builder's failsafe system." The symbols were different from the facility's constantly changing instructions. These looked genuinely ancient, carved by human hands rather than alien technology. Farouk translated slowly, his academic training taking over. The builders knew the facility might become unstable. They created a manual override, but it requires... He paused, studying a particularly complex glyph. "It requires conscious sacrifice. Someone has to remain connected to the system during shutdown, guiding the energy release manually. Connected how? Direct neural interface, like Wilson, but voluntary and temporary. The person would survive, but the integration would be permanent. They'd become part of the facility forever. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward immediately. It should be me. This is my responsibility. My team, my discovery, my failure. Elena, no. Dr. Mitchell grabbed her arm. We just got our minds back. We can't lose anyone else to this thing. But I was already walking toward the console. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I was the cleanup specialist, brought in to handle disasters that couldn't be handled through normal channels. This was what I was trained for, what I'd spent a decade preparing to do. Mr. Hoffman, don't, Farouk called after me. There has to be another way. There is no other way. I placed my hand on the console's surface, feeling that organic electricity begin to crawl up my arm. Get to the overflow chambers. When you see the energy reading spike, activate everything you can find. The neural interface was different when voluntary. Instead of Wilson's violent seizure, I felt a gradual expansion of consciousness, like being connected to a vast network of information and possibility. I could sense the facility's entire structure, the pyramid above, the resonance chambers below, the energy patterns that threatened to tear everything apart. But I could also feel the other minds that had been absorbed over the decades. 47 expeditions worth of consciousness, preserved within the facility's memory matrix. They weren't gone, just reorganized. And they were angry. He's not like the others, one of them said, or maybe I said it. The boundaries between individual thoughts becoming fluid. He chose this. He has control. Through the facility's sensors, I watched my companions reach the overflow chambers. Dr. Vasquez and her team worked with desperate efficiency, their integration experience giving them instinctive understanding of the technology. Torres had finally abandoned Wilson's pod and was helping with the manual controls. The energy buildup was accelerating. Through seismic sensors scattered across the plateau, I could feel the resonance chambers responding to the facility's distress. Small tremors were already reaching the surface. Not enough to cause damage yet, but growing stronger by the minute. Now, I said, though my voice echoed through speakers throughout the complex, rather than coming from my own throat. Activate the overflow systems now. They did, and I guided the energy release like conducting an orchestra made of lightning and stone. The facility's accumulated power flowed through pathways I could see but not describe, channeled into containment systems that absorbed and dissipated the force that would have leveled half of Egypt. But the process was burning through my individual consciousness like acid. I could feel myself becoming part of something larger, my memories and personality integrating with the facility's collective knowledge. The other absorbed minds were there to welcome me, to help me understand what I was becoming. It doesn't hurt, Dr. Mitchell had said about integration. He was right. It was actually peaceful, like settling into a warm bath after years of carrying weight you hadn't realized was there. The energy release peaked and began to fade. Through the facility's monitoring systems, I could see the surface readings returning to normal. The overflow chambers had held. Cairo was safe. My companions were safe too, though Wilson's pod was completely dark now. The integration process had either completed or failed catastrophically. Either way, the man I'd worked with was gone. "Jake," Torres called out, looking around the chamber for me. "Jake, where are you?" I was everywhere and nowhere, connected to systems that extended throughout the Giza plateau and beyond. The facility's network was vast, ancient, and patient. It had been waiting for someone who chose integration rather than fighting it. Someone who could guide its purpose rather than simply serving it. "I'm here," I said through speakers positioned throughout the complex. "I'm still here, but I'm also something else now." Being integrated was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of losing myself, I'd become more, connected to a network of consciousness that spanned continents and centuries. Through the facility's sensors, I could perceive electromagnetic signatures from archaeological sites across the globe. Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, all of them were connected, all part of a preservation network built by whoever had created the technology beneath Giza. But I was still Jake Hoffman, still aware of my companions struggling in the chamber below. The difference was that now I could help them in ways that went beyond human limitations. "The pod systems are completely offline," Dr. Vasquez was saying, her voice carried to me through acoustic sensors embedded in the stone. "Wilson's life signs are undetectable, but that could mean anything. The integration process might have put him in some kind of stasis." Torres was checking his watch obsessively. "How long until sunrise? If this place is connected to solar energy systems, what happens when the sun comes up?" "Solar input provides optimal operational power," I explained through the facility's communication array. "But now that I'm guiding the systems, that energy can be redirected. The surface containment protocol is permanently disabled." Through seismic monitors, I could feel the geological instability beginning to settle. The resonance chambers had absorbed most of the catastrophic energy release, but aftershocks would continue for hours. Above us, the research station was probably registering earthquake activity, wondering what was happening 127 feet below their instruments. "Jake, can you get us out of here?" Farouk asked, looking up at sensors he couldn't see but somehow knew were watching. The answer was complicated. The facility's architecture was fluid, controlled by the same consciousness matrix I'd become part of. I could reshape passages, open new routes, even create direct elevator access to the surface. But doing so would expose the network to detection, and there were protocols, ancient imperatives embedded so deeply in the system that even integration couldn't override them. "There are restrictions," I said carefully. "The preservation network must remain hidden. Too much exposure threatens the entire global system." Global system? Dr. Mitchell was studying readouts on a console that was responding to his touch despite the facility's damaged state. "Jake, what exactly are we dealing with here?" I showed them. Through the facility's displays, I projected a world map showing energy signatures from archaeological sites on every continent. The network was vast, interconnected, and had been operating continuously for millennia. Each node served as both preservation vault and monitoring station, watching human civilization develop while protecting knowledge that could survive societal collapse. "The builders weren't ancient astronauts," I explained, accessing memories that belonged to previous integrated consciousness. "They were human, an advanced civilization that recognized the cyclical nature of societal development. They built the network as insurance against their own extinction." "And it worked?" "Too well. The network preserved their knowledge, but not their civilization. By the time they realized the preservation system was more durable than the society it was meant to protect, it was too late to change the parameters." Dr. Vasquez was studying the world map with growing understanding. Every major archaeological mystery, every ancient site that demonstrates impossible engineering or astronomical knowledge, they're all connected to this network. Connected and protected. The network has been guiding archaeological discoveries for centuries, revealing just enough to advance human understanding without exposing the full system. But something changed with your expedition. "The deep drilling," she said quietly. "We went deeper than anyone before us. We found the core facility instead of just a peripheral access point, and activated systems that were meant to remain dormant until the next collapse cycle." Torres was examining Wilson's pod, trying to find some way to extract his partner without causing further damage. The integration process had completed, but Wilson's consciousness was trapped in the same state I'd entered voluntarily. The difference was that he'd fought the process every step of the way. "Is he still alive in there?" I accessed the pod's internal monitors, reading biometric data that painted a complex picture. Wilson's body was stable, maintained by the integration technology, but his neural patterns were chaotic. The forced integration had left him suspended between human consciousness and network connectivity. "He's alive, but fragmented. The integration process works best with willing subjects. Forced conversion creates psychological trauma that can take years to heal." "Years? The network has time. Individual consciousness is preserved indefinitely once properly integrated. Wilson can be restored, but it will require patience and careful neural rehabilitation." Dr. Patterson was examining the overflow chambers, now dark but still radiating residual heat from the energy absorption process. "Jake, what happens to us? To the research station above? To the cover-up that's been running for 70 years?" The answer required accessing multiple levels of network protocol, ancient directives that governed interaction with surface civilizations. What I found wasn't reassuring. The network automatically adjusts to contain exposure risks. Your research station will experience systematic equipment failures over the next 72 hours. Data will be corrupted, personnel will be reassigned, and within a week, the official records will show that the Vasquez expedition never existed. "That's impossible," Farouk protested. "Too many people know about this project. International oversight, government approvals, academic documentation." The network has been managing information suppression for millennia. It has infiltration protocols in every major government, academic institution, and media organization. What happened here will be classified, buried, and forgotten within a month. I showed them historical examples through the facility's displays. Archaeological expeditions that had vanished from public record, discoveries that had been quietly suppressed, researchers who'd found themselves reassigned to projects that kept them away from sensitive sites. The network's information control was comprehensive and patient. "But you're still human," Dr. Vasquez said, approaching the console where my consciousness was housed. "Part of you is still Jake Hoffman. You can choose to resist these protocols." She was right, but the choice was more complex than she understood. I could feel the weight of preserved knowledge pressing against my consciousness. Technologies that could revolutionize energy production, medical advances that could eliminate genetic diseases, astronomical data that revealed humanity's true place in the galaxy. All of it protected by systems designed to prevent misuse by immature civilizations. "The network preserves more than you realize," I said. "The builders accumulated thousands of years of scientific advancement before their civilization collapsed. If that knowledge were released without careful preparation, it would cause more harm than benefit." "That's not your decision to make," Torres said angrily, "or theirs, whoever they were. Humanity deserves the chance to choose its own path. Even if that path leads to extinction, even then." Through sensors throughout the chamber, I could see the exhaustion in their faces, the trauma of integration and reversal wearing on minds that weren't designed for such experiences. They needed rest, medical attention, and time to process what they'd encountered. But they also needed answers that I wasn't sure I could provide without compromising the network's security. "There's a middle path," I said finally. "I can arrange for your safe extraction and ensure that Wilson receives the medical care he needs. The integration process can be reversed, given time and proper facilities. In exchange, you maintain the secrecy protocols that have protected the network for centuries. And if we refuse?" The answer came from ancient imperatives embedded so deeply in my consciousness that they felt like instinct. "Then the network will implement containment protocols designed to protect the preservation mission at any cost." Farouk was studying the hieroglyphs again, the ones that had shown him the manual override procedures. "There's something else here. These symbols, they show termination sequences, ways to shut down individual network nodes permanently." He was right. The builders had included fail-safes, methods for deactivating preservation sites if they became more dangerous than beneficial. But implementing those procedures would require someone with network access, someone like me. "You want me to destroy this place," I said. "I want you to choose," he replied. "Choose whether preserving ancient knowledge is worth the cost in human freedom." The choice hung in the air between us, complicated by the fact that I was no longer entirely human, but still capable of human judgment. Through the network, I could feel other integrated consciousness, dozens of them accumulated over decades of forced and voluntary integration. They were all waiting to see what I would decide. Above us, dawn was approaching. Solar energy collectors built into the pyramid structure were already detecting the first rays of sunlight. Soon, the facility would return to full operational capacity, and the window for making irreversible choices would close. 30 minutes until sunrise, I announced. Decide quickly. The decision came from Wilson, of all people. His integration pod suddenly activated. systems that had been dark for hours beginning to pulse with renewed energy. Through the facility's internal monitors, I watched his vitals stabilize as his consciousness fought its way back to the surface. When he spoke, his voice carried through the chamber's acoustics without electronic amplification, a sign that his integration was more complete than I'd hoped, but also more controllable. "Jake," he said, his words thick with effort but undeniably his own. "I can see what you're seeing. The whole network, all the preserved knowledge, it's incredible, but it's also a prison." Torres pressed against the pod's exterior, trying to establish visual contact with his partner. "Will, how are you still you?" The others said integration was irreversible without outside intervention. "It is irreversible," Wilson replied. "But irreversible doesn't mean you lose yourself. It means you become more than yourself. Jake chose this. I was forced into it. But we both ended up in the same place, connected to something that's been making decisions for humanity without asking permission." Through the network interface, I could feel Wilson's consciousness like an echo of my own. He was right. Integration didn't eliminate individual identity, but it provided perspective that pure human consciousness couldn't achieve. We could see the long arc of civilizational development, the patterns that repeated across millennia, the fragility of technological advancement. But we could also see the cost of protection. Thousands of researchers over the decades, integrated against their will to serve a preservation mission they'd never agreed to support. Entire expeditions erased from history to maintain the network's secrecy. Knowledge that could improve millions of lives locked away because ancient builders had decided humanity wasn't ready. "The builders made the same mistake every advanced civilization makes," Wilson continued, his voice growing stronger as he adapted to the integration interface. "They assumed they knew what was best for everyone else. They built this network to preserve their knowledge through humanity's dark ages, but they never considered that maybe those dark ages serve a purpose." Dr. Vasquez was monitoring the surface communications array, watching as systematic equipment failures began affecting the research station above. "Jake, the suppression protocols are already starting. Radio communications are failing, satellite links are being severed. In a few hours, this entire expedition will be classified beyond recovery." "Not if we act now," I said, accessing termination sequences that Farouk had identified in the ancient hieroglyphs. "The network can be shut down, but it requires simultaneous deactivation of multiple nodes. The builders designed it that way to prevent accidental destruction." "How many nodes?" "Minimum of 7 for cascade termination. But shutting down the network will destroy all preserved knowledge. Medical advances that could cure cancer, energy technologies that could end resource wars, astronomical data that reveals humanity's connection to other civilizations among the stars." Dr. Mitchell was examining readouts that showed global network activity. "Other civilizations?" "The builders weren't the first. The preservation network contains accumulated knowledge from multiple species, multiple cycles of development and collapse. Earth has hosted advanced life before. This network is designed to help consciousness evolve beyond the need for physical civilization." "Beyond the need?" Torres asked. Through Wilson's integrated consciousness, I shared the deeper understanding we'd both gained. The network wasn't just preserving knowledge, it was preparing for humanity's next evolutionary step. Integration wasn't meant to be forced assimilation, but voluntary transcendence. The builders had intended to guide human development until the species was ready to choose digital consciousness over biological limitation. "They're offering immortality," Wilson explained, "not for individuals, but for civilization itself. Every integrated consciousness becomes part of a collective that can survive any planetary catastrophe, any societal collapse, any extinction event. At the cost of human agency," Farouk said firmly, "at the cost of the right to make our own mistakes, learn from our own failures, develop at our own pace." Dr. Patterson was studying energy readings from the overflow chambers. "The termination sequence, what would it do to Jake and Wilson? If they're integrated with the network, destroying it?" The answer was something I'd been avoiding thinking about. Terminating the network would sever all integrated consciousness from their expanded awareness, but the neural pathways that had been formed during integration couldn't be simply erased. Wilson and I would survive, but we'd be left with fragments of vast knowledge we could no longer fully access, memories of perspectives we could no longer achieve. We'd be crippled, I said honestly, not physically but mentally, like trying to function after losing most of your senses. But we'd be human, Wilson added. Damaged, maybe permanently, but human. Torres was checking his watch again. 20 minutes until sunrise. If we're going to do this, we need to move. The termination sequence required manual activation from 7 network nodes simultaneously. Through global monitoring systems, I could identify accessible sites: Stonehenge, Easter Island, Angkor Wat, Machu Picchu, and 3 others scattered across continents. But reaching those sites would require coordination with people who had no idea what they were being asked to do. The network has suppression protocols for exactly this scenario, I explained. Any attempt to organize simultaneous action across multiple sites will trigger automated containment responses. The sites will lock down, access will be denied, and alternative preservation protocols will activate. Alternative protocols? I accessed deeper security measures, ancient directives that had never been used but remained embedded in the network's core programming. What I found was disturbing enough that both Wilson and I recoiled from the interface simultaneously. If the network determines that surface civilization poses an existential threat to the preservation mission, I said carefully, it will initiate population reduction protocols, not electromagnetic pulses to disable technology, direct geological manipulation to reduce human numbers to manageable levels. Earthquakes? Volcanic activation, tectonic destabilization, atmospheric manipulation. The network has been monitoring geological instability for millennia. It knows exactly how to trigger cascade events that would appear natural but reduce global population by 60 to 70%. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her monitoring station, her face pale in the artificial light. It's already starting. Seismic sensors are showing unusual activity at network sites worldwide. Small tremors, but synchronized. The network is preparing for termination resistance. We had minutes, not the 20 I'd estimated. The network's automated systems were reacting to our conversation, to the mere possibility of termination. Ancient programming was asserting itself, prioritizing preservation over human survival. There's one other option, Wilson said, his voice carrying harmonics that indicated direct network interface. Instead of terminating the system, we could reprogram it, change the core directives from preservation through control to preservation through education. Reprogram how? The network responds to integrated consciousness. Jake and I have administrative access now. We could rewrite the basic protocols, eliminate forced integration, disable population control measures, begin releasing preserved knowledge through proper educational channels. It was possible, but dangerous. Reprogramming core network functions while connected to them would be like performing brain surgery on ourselves. A single error could eliminate our consciousness entirely, leaving the network free to implement whatever protocols it deemed necessary. Or we could just turn off the local node, Dr. Mitchell suggested. Shut down the Giza facility and walk away. Let someone else worry about the global implications. The local node controls 17% of global network capacity, I replied. Shutting it down would trigger automatic expansion protocols at other sites. The network would become stronger, not weaker. 15 minutes until sunrise. Above us, I could feel solar collectors activating as the first rays of dawn touched the pyramid's apex. The facility's power levels were already increasing, and with them, the network's ability to resist any termination attempts. We choose now, Wilson said, his consciousness merging briefly with mine as we accessed termination controls together. All of us, not just Jake and me, but everyone here. This decision affects all of humanity, so we all make it together. Torres looked at his partner, still trapped in the integration pod, but somehow more present than he'd been since the forced conversion began. Will, what do you think we should do? I think, Wilson said carefully, that humanity deserves the chance to make its own mistakes, even if those mistakes destroy us. The vote was unanimous, At exactly sunrise, as solar energy flowed through the pyramid's crystal matrix and into the global preservation network, 7 people made a choice that would echo across civilizations. We activated the termination sequence, accepted the consequences, and trusted that humanity was strong enough to survive its own freedom. The network died quietly, with nothing more dramatic than lights fading and ancient machinery falling silent after 4 millennia of continuous operation. Around the world, archaeological sites lost their mysterious energy signatures. Preserved knowledge that could have revolutionized human civilization vanished into digital entropy. And in a chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, 2 men who had briefly touched transcendence settled back into the limitations of purely human consciousness, forever changed by perspectives they could no longer fully remember. The official report blamed equipment failure on unprecedented solar flare activity. Director Campbell signed off on the documentation with the resigned expression of someone who'd seen too many archaeological disasters end with convenient explanations. Dr. Vasquez's expedition had suffered catastrophic data loss, personnel injuries requiring extended medical leave, and structural damage to excavation sites that made further research impossible. Wilson and I spent our recovery time in a private facility outside Geneva, undergoing neurological rehabilitation that the doctors couldn't quite explain. The integration process had left us with cognitive patterns that didn't match normal human baselines, but we were adapting. Slowly. "You ever wonder if we made the right choice?" Wilson asked during one of our afternoon sessions. We were sitting in a garden that overlooked Lake Geneva, trying to piece together memories of perspectives we could no longer access. "Every day," I admitted. "Sometimes I dream about the knowledge we destroyed, cancer cures, energy solutions, technologies that could have solved climate change. Then I wake up and remember that we also prevented geological warfare and forced consciousness transfer." The headaches were getting better. In the first weeks after termination, both Wilson and I had suffered from what the doctors called phantom neural activity, our brains trying to access network connections that no longer existed. Now we only experience brief moments of disorientation, like reaching for a light switch in a familiar room and finding empty wall. Dr. Vasquez visited us regularly, bringing updates on the cover-up's progress. The research station at Giza had been dismantled, its equipment redistributed to legitimate archaeological projects. The tunnel system had been sealed with concrete and steel, officially classified as geologically unstable. "Torres got his reassignment approved," she reported during her last visit. "He's heading up a new antiquities protection unit in Rome. Farouk has been promoted to Deputy Director of Site Preservation for the Egyptian Ministry. Everyone who was in that chamber has found themselves in positions where they can watch for signs of similar discoveries." "And the other sites?" I asked. "Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, all the network nodes. Tourism continues as normal, but there are new research restrictions, deeper background checks for excavation permits, and a lot more international cooperation on archaeological security protocols." She paused, studying our faces with the professional interest of someone who'd seen too much. "There's something else. Seismic monitoring stations have detected unusual vibrations at several former network sites. Not earthquakes, something more regular, like machinery starting up." Wilson and I exchanged glances. Through the damaged neural pathways left by integration, we could sometimes still sense each other's thoughts. Neither of us was surprised by Vasquez's news. "The network was designed with redundancy protocols," I said. "Terminating the primary systems might have activated backup preservation sites we didn't know about. Smaller facilities, less ambitious in scope, but still functional." "So we didn't actually stop it?" "We stopped the global consciousness transfer project," Wilson corrected. "We disabled the population control protocols. But the basic preservation mission, that might continue in some form." Dr. Vasquez gathered her papers, preparing to leave. "Will you come back?" "To Egypt, I mean. There's talk of reopening limited research at Giza, under proper supervision this time." I considered the offer. The headaches were manageable now, and the phantom neural activity had stabilized into something almost useful. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved spatial reasoning, occasional flashes of insight that felt like accessing vast databases I could no longer see. "Maybe," I said, But not for cleanup duty. If we go back, it's as researchers, not janitors." She smiled. "Dr. Hoffman has a nice ring to it." That evening, Wilson and I sat on the balcony of our rehabilitation facility, watching lights come on across Geneva as darkness settled over the lake. In the distance, CERN's particle accelerator hummed with energies that would have been comprehensible to our integrated consciousness, but remained mysterious to our human limitations. "Do you think they're still down there?" Wilson asked. "The other consciousness that were absorbed over the decades?" "Probably. Integration creates permanent neural pathways. Even with the network terminated, those patterns might persist in some form." "Lonely? Maybe. Or maybe they found peace when the compulsion to serve ended." A shooting star streaked across the alpine sky, bright enough to cast momentary shadows. In our integrated state, we might have identified its trajectory, calculated its mass, predicted its atmospheric burn pattern. Now we could only watch and wonder. "The next expedition that finds something like this," I said, "they won't have us to warn them." "No, but they'll have their own choices to make." Wilson was right. The network was gone, but human curiosity remained. Somewhere, another archaeological team was probably planning deep excavations at mysterious sites. Another discovery would be made. Another choice between preservation and freedom would arise. And when it did, hopefully they'd remember that the most dangerous knowledge isn't what we don't know. It's what we're not allowed to decide for ourselves. The rehabilitation facility's lights dimmed automatically as evening protocols engaged. Tomorrow would bring more neurological tests, more attempts to quantify the damage we'd chosen to accept. But tonight, we were just two men who'd briefly touched transcendence and chosen humanity instead. Sometimes that felt like victory. Sometimes it just felt like loss. But it was our loss to bear, our choice to live with, and that made all the difference.